We want to thank everybody for joining us today. And here we go. Our webinar today is on the state of heavy-duty repair in 2022. It's our second annual report. We're excited to get into that. But first, meet the presenters. I'm Jacob Findlay,
Chris O'Brien,
Co-Founder, Executive Chairman of Fullbay. Chris.
Good to see you again, Jacob.
Chris is our COO.
It's almost once a month now, too, that we get to see each other on these.
Just for this.
Just for these.
Quick disclaimer. As always, what we're going to discuss here is general advice in nature. So if you need advice specific to your situation, consult your legal, accounting, or other professional for your specific situation. Okay, so what we're going to cover today is the state of heavy-duty repair. We have a lot to get through, so hopefully we don't end up rushing at the end like usual. Sorry, Chris. And we're going to dive into it. So looking at the commercial repair shops and the diesel industry, the profile of who we surveyed for this report and where we got the data. We're going to go into the parts shortage and inventory management, what we saw from the report and what should be followed as best practices to react to the parts shortage based on the data that we got through the report. And then technician hiring, managing, and the technician shortage. So that's what we're going to cover.
Yeah,
so let's jump in. So first, the state of heavy-duty repair. So it's a report. You can get it in printed form or you can download it online. This is something that we were asked to do over and over again by our customers and by people in the industry, given the fact that we're in this position where we have the largest collection of real-time repair information in North America, at least. And we're really happy to partner with TMC the first year and this year with TMC and with Motor. And the idea was that we take both anonymized data from our app that our customers are willing to share, in addition to survey data, and we'll look at that in a minute. We just want to emphasize that if you're not a member of TMC, one of the great benefits of this report is that we also include recommended practices or RPs from TMC throughout the report. Basically a list of best practices that the Technology and Maintenance Council of the American Trucking Associations has put together with their membership over the years. And you can access those full RPs as a TMC member. So if you want to join TMC, we also have a discount code for membership because we want to encourage as many independent repair shops as possible to join TMC and engage and help develop these best practices. So we're happy to continue our partnership with TMC. So as I mentioned, the methodology was anonymized data from the app. So we chose 500 shops that had been with us for at least 12 months and randomly chose the 500 as a good sample of the population. And we realized that that population of shops is going to be skewed toward best practices already, things like knowing efficiency and so forth. So to counter that and balance that, we also did a survey to get qualitative responses and get responses from outside our customer base. So we had 900 responses to the survey. This came from commercial freight, logistics, repair industries.
Yeah, it's pretty solid information. And to your point, we'll see that later where, tech efficiency as one area.
Yeah.
A lot of folks are familiar with it.
Yeah. And then you'll also see expert opinions, variety of perspectives from these experts, from both Fullbay customers and non-Fullbay customers, industry leaders, and so forth. So once again, so TMC and Motor are our partners this year on the report. And we also want to thank all of the experts who commented here. So you can see in the fine print there's just so many. Don from FleetNet America, Tony Grace, ATS Fleet Service in Michigan, Jay Ganinin, Wrenchway, Aaron from American Diesel Training Centers. So the report has got some really good perspective from these people. So we Definitely. Are grateful to our partners and to all of these experts who helped us build the report. Okay, let's jump in. So the commercial repair shops in the diesel industry. So first of all, we want to kind of get an idea of who our audience is for the webinar, at least the live portion. You'll be able to stream this again online through our website in the future, but I'm going to launch a polling question. If you could, just tell us, how did your shop perform in 2021? So this survey should be showing on your screen now. So just let us know, was it an excellent year, exceeded revenue plans, just a good year? Was it a difficult year, or was it a disaster and we fell below our revenue plan? And by the way, with this question, we're assuming that there was a revenue plan. And if there wasn't a revenue plan, there should be, and it's not too late to put one together for this year. So if you go on our website, we have a free download. It's a really simple spreadsheet, amazingly simple yet powerful, that will help you plan your financials for a year. And it's just such a good thing for any business to do.
And breaking it down into quarterly strategies, right? You have your overarching goals and objectives, whether it be from revenue or things that you're trying to complete, and then measuring those every quarter, monthly, taking a look at the information, and then rolling up to how well did we do this quarter, and then making sure you pivot or adjust as you get into the next quarter. Definitely don't wait to the end of the year to say, how did I do or how am I doing?
Okay, so looks like we've got about 54% responses here. So I'm going to end this. I'm going to share the results. So this is what you said. Looks like 38% of you said it was an excellent year and we exceeded revenue plans. It's awesome. Congratulations. 36% good year. So the disaster was 0. So difficult year and we were under revenue plan by a little bit. It's 27%.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
To be expected. Not bad.
All right, let's jump in. So one of the things that we were able to see was going all the way back to 2019. With our first report, we measured year over year revenue for shops. So basically we said January, February, March, April of 2020, how did the shops perform versus the year before versus 2019? And this is a really powerful chart showing how things perform. So basically what you're seeing on the left side here is in January 2020, there's about 5% year over year revenue growth. So remember, this is right before the pandemic hit. So not bad, 5% year over year. And then February is down to 0, March, and then the floor drops out of it, right? Yeah. So this white section here is 2020 compared to 2019. So it's very clear the impact of the pandemic, especially in the first part of this year. And when you go into the report, and we'll talk about this, we'll show this, you can also see the impact on revenue by region and by industry. Another wave hits at the end of 2020 and then into 2021. Obviously, there's a huge climb here in the first part of the year because it's comparing 2021 revenue versus that huge deficit when COVID hit. So clearly the industry starts to recover. And even though it comes down here, the denominator is higher over here. So it's actually pretty good growth rate year over year. So good signs.
Yeah. Then it starts to stabilize toward the end, ultimately staying above, which is nice. That's what we want to see.
Yep. And there's a quote from you here, Chris. So it's no surprise this industry is resilient, but despite ongoing issues around COVID, supply chain disruptions and other problems, it's impressive to see strong growth in every region. So totally agree. And one of the great things about the commercial repair industry is, for the most part, there doesn't seem to be any shortage of work. That's not the issue. It's finding technicians and now finding parts is the issue. So if you can dial in the technician piece and the parts piece, you should be running like a well-oiled machine if you've got the right tools in place, right best practices. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's more older equipment on the road, right? Manufacturing's behind, so we're seeing that as we get into the parts shortage. So repairs more than likely would be up, maintaining older equipment.
Yep, exactly. All right, some quick stats on what we saw. So 80% of shops saw a net profit in 2021, with the average being 6 to 10%. 17% of shops do not know their net profit, though.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So of those that know, 80% saw a net profit. Why would a shop not know their net profit?
I mean, in this day and age, there's so many resources out there. It's possible that they just started their business. They maybe didn't put a plan together, but I can't imagine being in business 1, 2, or 5 years and not knowing if you made money or not. That's a little bit alarming.
Well, I think a lot of people get into the industry, though, usually as a former technician. They know they can repair. They know roughly what their costs are, so roughly what to charge. And that's good enough, right? Generally speaking, you can kind of brute force it that way.
You can brute force it. And I think a lot of success stories are built off of that. But then scaling and building a company, there has to be some additional disciplines. And I think we see it all the time where folks, maybe they leave a dealership or somewhere and they don't realize that there's actually insurance that has to be, like liability insurance. And there's other factors that go into running a company, including your customer doesn't pay you for 60 days or 90 days and you have to float cash.
Right.
So if you're doing transactional business, you don't always get the cash in hand at the end of the repair. And I think having a plan and understanding where you're at with profits versus just, do I have money in the bank or not?
Right. Yeah. So doing the basics like that is critical for long-term survival of a business, because you have to understand the ins and outs of the cash flow and how you might have a bunch of money in the bank, but that's because your quarterly payroll tax payment is due, and that money needs to go to that, not to a boat.
Exactly.
So if you want to stay in business long term, you really need to understand that.
There's an extra week in March, and you're like, look at all this money in March.
Right,
It's like, well, there's an extra week.
Yeah. And by the way, this comes from our survey results from the 800 respondents to the survey. And what we did was we controlled if the respondent was a technician or somebody that is not the owner of the shop. We kept them out of this statistic right here.
Yeah.
So that's 17% of owners, basically, people who should know their profit, don't know their profit. And then about 50% said that hiring techs was their biggest challenge. 30% had challenges with inefficiencies in repairs.
Yeah. All tied to labor. I think this is where, the work that Jay and Aaron are doing at their two groups, American Diesel Training Centers,
Jay
Find a Wrench.
Yeah.
Great gentlemen that can help solve some of these problems. But at the end of the day, the efficiency, if you just hire people and you're not looking at efficiency or you're not aware of what efficiency is problematic in itself.
Yep, totally. This is interesting. So the shop labor rates by region. So you can kind of dial in here and see, and we have Canada as a separate region, what the going labor rate is as of the date of this report for each region. So all of them are over $100 an hour except for the Midwest.
Yeah, and everybody thinks, California is so expensive. I was shocked when I saw California lower than the Southeast. I didn't think I'd see that coming. Canada, I thought, yeah, that seems reasonable because there's a lot of mileage. Yeah, it's remote. Yeah. I figured travel, and different, scarce resources, et cetera. I imagine that's where that starts to drive that demand. But I have always thought of California as being expensive, maybe because of real estate or whatever. I definitely shocked the Southeast. And even the Southwest, and these aren't bad things, right? These are just folks that are trying to make sure that it says they're maybe recognizing the labor shortage and paying fair wages, right? They might have had to update their wage or comp plans because, the willingness to work or the competitive landscape in their market.
But did they raise their labor rates?
Right.
Maybe you're paying the techs more, but are you translating that to an increase in labor rates? Or
that would be an assertion.
do you feel too bad to do that?
Right.
We're going to talk about that. We're going to actually show that data here in a slide. So Interesting. Next thing, do shops charge for DOTs and diagnosis?
This is like the chicken or the egg, the big debacle. Like you can't, this is a very difficult conversation to have on, do you charge, do you not charge? Some people say, well, of course you should charge. You had to pay a technician. And then others say, well, that's their, that's how they generate work. They do free inspections to generate work, and they generate more work from these DOT inspections or federal inspections of state and local inspections.
Yeah.
This is a tough call, but it was very, it's interesting to see, and we just did a paper on this as well, like, do you charge a higher rate as a younger company versus an older company? And those stats were even just as interesting, that older companies charge lower rates for DOT inspections.
So the quote from Don here from FleetNet, performing DOTs should not be a courtesy item. It's important service providers get paid fairly for their work if they are going to invest in the people, tools, equipment, and technology to be at the top of their game. I can't stress how important it is and will be that shops charge properly to fuel their business. Totally agree with that. If you want to be around long-term, and the fleets need commercial shops to be around long-term, there needs to be a fair exchange of value there. So charging for DOT, you can see the breakdown, 22% charge less than 50. Some of them are doing it as a loss leader to bring business in the door, which maybe in some exceptional cases is what you have to do to bring business in. But generally speaking, it's probably not necessary to do. And you found that technician, you're employing them and paying for everything that's surrounding that technician, whether it's the building or a service truck, the tools, an hour of that technician's time or however long it takes to do a thorough DOT inspection, you got to get compensated for that. Even though you're going to find things that are wrong, it's still the right thing to do.
And if you're managing the fleet, more than likely you're not finding you're not running into 1 or 2 hours of issues while you're trying to do your inspection. So if you own or manage that fleet, more than likely this is a routine inspection. You're going to find some basic stuff because you've got it maintained. But if you're doing DOT inspections for business that you don't necessarily own the maintenance program, it could get very problematic if it's cheap or you're trying to do it for free as a loss leader.
Yeah, because that kind of customer that will only pay $0 for a DOT or $10 or whatever, They're going to go shop around whatever repairs you found in addition. And, it's one of those things where do you really want those customers in the first place? Charging for diag goes along the same lines, right?
It's very similar.
So generally speaking, what we've discovered in talking to thousands of shops is that the best practice, and there's exceptions for everything, but generally speaking, the best practice is a truck comes in the door, you need to inspect it. And there's a lot of reasons for that. You don't want to miss something that otherwise would have caused the truck to go down. In fact, if you find it, the customer should be happy about that. And then you give them the option to make the repair or not. So,
yeah, very similar to a driver vehicle inspection. Truck drivers are checking the equipment every day before they take the equipment out, right? They're doing a walk around, they're doing a pre-trip, post-trip. We see a lot of shops doing kind of that pre-trip inspection, if you will, and maybe that is the free 15-minute walk around looking for obvious stuff. There's other folks that are going a little bit further in depth, but if you're actually, let's say you cite something that's leaking, and then you're starting to fully diagnose it and determine what the parts are to repair it, you should be charging for that time to diagnose it, especially if it's electrical in nature. And then whether you do some negotiation on the final repair, the customer approves the repair, and you apply some of those dollars toward it, you definitely should. It's a fair exchange of value. You should win. The customer should win, because doing all of that type of work for free I think that could put you out of business sooner than later. Now, having said that, you might be doing those as part of contracts, right? Back to, people have been around for 20 years, or, maybe mid-market shops that have contracts with private fleets. It might be part of the program where every truck that you work on gets this courtesy inspection or gets this, discounted rate for doing these types of inspections, because it's part of the program, because they've signed up with a monthly agreement with you, et cetera. And that's included in the program.
Yep.
So definitely there's a lot of different colors to this thing, and you got to be careful that if you hear a rumor that someone doesn't charge, there's probably some other program in place. It's not all for free.
Yeah. Makes sense. By the way, we have a question here from Brad. Can we search these shop rates by region? In the report, we only have it broken down by the general region, West, Midwest, Southwest, and so on. We do have that data. So Brad, if you have a specific question on like a state, we can probably get that information to you. Just hit us up. All right. Now let's jump into so that's kind of an overview of how the industry is done and what we're seeing. Let's jump into the parts shortage and close to that, inventory management. And Irvin Bowman, who we've had on a webinar before, he's a friend, and definitely Irvin, I think would agree with this, possibly the guy who works parts markup tables as a hobby on the weekend.
But he's a scientist. He's a parts markup scientist.
Exactly. He has it down to a science. So Irvin is also a coach with the Truck Shop Network. He says a shop lives or dies based on how they handle parts. And there's many reasons why that is very true. So let's jump in.
Yeah, it's back to that old adage, parts on a shelf are really cash. They're just stacks of cash on a shelf.
So let us know, have you been impacted by the parts shortage? So yes, no, or somewhat. And who would have thought coming out of COVID, as challenging as that was, and now we've got the great resignation, labor shortages. We were already dealing with the skills gap, people not going into blue collar fields like they used to. And now we've got the parts shortage. So let us know if this has impacted you or not. And so we've got close to 60% participation. I'm going to share these results. So 70% say yes, 7% no, and then 23% somewhat. Thanks for your responses. So let's dive into this. Based on our survey, 82% reported at least some disruption from the part shortage in 2021. So if our audience right now is a proxy, perhaps it's getting better. 70% obviously is better, depending on the sample distribution, but 17% reported extreme disruptions in their operation. And what are you hearing out there, Chris? Is it still an issue? Is it calming down?
Yeah, I think it's still an issue. It's across the board. I don't think it's just specific to heavy duty. I think it's in automotive. it's a little bit of everywhere. I think some folks were carrying quite a bit of inventory and or carry a large inventory in general. Like we know some shops that are carrying $1 million in inventory. They probably were less impacted, and or they have some great supply chain relationships where maybe they're getting an allocation of parts because they buy so many. So I think that those were some, those are unique. Those are probably unicorn accounts that are out there. But at the same time, that's a lot of overhead, right? You have to have a tight cycle count program. There's shrink involved with that stuff. So, stocking all of the shelves may not be the solution with all of this. But it's amazing that even on a personal note, I need something basic like a set of lifters. You can get a cam, but you can't get the lifters.
And the downside to, even if you, like Jimmy's quote here, so Jimmy Wall with Donahue, the part shortage is real. Today a part may be available in abundance, and then tomorrow you have to wait a month to get it. So does that mean we have to stock up on all parts and just explode our inventory? Because if I do that, now I have that much more cash just sitting on the shelves, and we know inventory is very much a depreciating asset. You basically, for every year you have money sitting on the shelves in inventory, you basically have to kiss 20% of that goodbye. It doesn't necessarily make money. It loses you money through carrying costs, obsolescence, shrinkage, all of that stuff. So what do you supposed, plus you just suck that cash out of the business into the inventory. What are you supposed to do?
Yeah, what's interesting is that's where I was going next. There's a fuel filter, a specific fuel filter that I need, and you could get it months ago. You can't get it now. So now I ordered it. I ordered 3 of them, and I'm going to wait 6 weeks to get them. But I ordered 3 because I was sick of it. I was like, well, I know I'll consume them over the period of probably 2 years, maybe a year and a half. But yeah, I think that this is one of the dilemmas is when is it disrupting your business and looking at flow, right? So that my example of buying 3 of them, I just was frustrated. It was a cheap part. I'm like, I'll just buy 3. But that you can't solve problems like that long term, right? Like I try to carry a bank of oil filters for the cars that we have at our home, right? Because I'll change those fluids. But doing that at a shop on a large scale, you have to really start evaluating the PM programs that you're running, the dedicated customers, the dedicated processes or services that you're providing, and start organizing your purchases around those. And then we mentioned this on another webinar, but those vendor relationships, if we're all buying from the same suppliers or the same vendors, we got to treat each other with respect. They're true partnerships, and know that at the end of the day, there's business decisions being made, right? Who's buying the most and who's also easy to deal with and pays their bills on time. So these vendors they have supply chain issues, right? And carrying costs. So they're probably making some business decisions. And now more than ever, it's just reevaluating, do you have a dedicated vendor, or have you just been buying from anyone that'll just get the part? And then what kind of relationship? Is it an aggressive relationship? Is it healthy? When was the last time you went to lunch with your vendor? Or when was the last time you just talked to your vendor normally instead of maybe a shouting match at where are my parts?
Which is crazy because like in normal times, the vendor is the one aggressively soliciting your business, bringing the donuts and the pens and the hats and everything. But it just goes to show the importance of having healthy win-win relationships with everybody you do business with, and that you're doing business the right way with integrity. Some quick stats on what we see on parts and inventory. 44% of shops reported only having a quarter or less of parts needed for a repair in inventory, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, right? Just-in-time inventory is how you keep stock quantities low. What do you think is the right solution there?
I mean, I don't know if I don't know if I have the answer to this, but I'm running into the same thing. I got a basic engine repair, right? I've got the motor completely broke down. I cannot assemble it. I probably have 50% of the parts, but now I'm at the point of I can get some of the parts, but I have to pay 1.5x what I should be paying.
What's interesting about this is the shops that tend to have the same customers over and over. They have a very close relationship with a few fleets. Not that they're totally exposed and only deal with one fleet, but they take over the fleet's PMs. They're seeing these trucks over and over again. It's a lot easier to predict which parts you're going to need if you're only dealing with, say, Freightliners and Volvos, for example. But if you never can predict what truck is going to be coming into the bay, it becomes a much harder to predict what parts you're going to need. And the probability that you have a truck taking up a bay because you can't find a part goes up.
Yeah, I think too, the use case that where I'm going to pay 1.5x for parts, there's no one to sell them to for me. So it's a problem, right? I got to get over is, do I want to solve my problem? Am I willing to pay for it? In a shop, that's one thing that you have to really evaluate. Everything's more expensive and you're doing a cost plus, right? So you're marking up your parts. So at the end of the day, even if you know the specific filter or part is $10 more than what you should pay, or is $5, whatever the number is, there's almost a point of you have to really evaluate the model that you're in. You don't want to do anything that's egregious where you're selling a part for 3 times what it costs, unless nowhere else you could buy it from, unless you pay that. But I think customers and everyone's understanding, and at the end of the day, even if you paid more for a part, you're marking it up and you got to protect your margin. So it isn't you take a decreased margin on the part because you had to pay more. All of that's passing through, and you just be transparent with your customers. Update your terms of service, like at the bottom of your invoices, the fine print. Put something in there tied to the supply chain and demand of parts. Like estimates are only good for a period of time, or as the supply chain has availability.
How about this one? 9.5% of shops are not managing cores.
That's almost like the budget thing that we talked about earlier when we started this. That is crazy. Cores are cash. Like sometimes it's maybe it's a transfer case, maybe it's a transmission, maybe it's an axle housing, whatever it is. There's tons of money in cores.
And that's straight out of your profit.
Straight out of the profit.
Cores.
Yeah.
What about this one? Only half of shops are performing an inventory count at least once a month.
Yeah, again, alarming. That's cash. When was the last time you balanced your checking account, or your checkbook, if you're still using a checkbook, or just looked at the bank statements? You literally have cash on a shelf and you're not interested in looking at it, making sure it's still there.
Well, it's part of the fundamentals, right, of business, because we talked about 20% carrying cost of your inventory. Part of that shrinkage, if you're not counting your inventory and the fast movers maybe daily or at least weekly, then you don't know what you have on the shelf, and maybe you prepare an estimate for a customer thinking you've got the parts, but you don't. It's a problem. And also, if you have a culture of accountability in terms of inventory, because you do regular counts, maybe A, B's, and C's, right? Which you can do in Fullbay. You can mark your fast movers, your A's to be counted more frequently, B's, C's. That culture of accountability tends to reduce the amount of shrinkage that you end up seeing in your inventory, because people know you're accountable. And if you see a bunch of parts are missing, you're going to investigate that. And one thing leads to another. So
super
another
important
benefit of counting inventory.
Yeah, even negatives. Negatives you should count daily. One, if you have negative inventory, that's a problem in itself, right? You're due for a cycle count. But if you have negatives on a consistent basis, a lot of folks are just like, hey, turn on the switches, allow me to sell negative because I just need to make the sale. There's something wrong with your inventory. And even if you run into those scenarios, somebody's grabbed the part from the bin next to it and you're off. And whether it could be the difference between a $5 part and a $10 part. It really just, we're not talking about bolts, nuts, and washers. There's usually something fundamentally wrong. If you got negatives, count daily. And if you're having a negative problem consistently, you definitely should reevaluate cycle counts, your approach to doing them, and get a count going, even if that's coming in on the weekend, to have everybody help count what's in stock, level setting all of the inventory, and then moving forward. And
it's not that hard to do. For sure, a full count is annoying, but if you get yourself on a schedule like this, like do the full count, suck it up, like rip the Band-Aid off, learn what you actually have in stock, and then get onto a frequency program like this. It's relatively easy to do, and you'll have probably an immediate bump to your profit.
Yeah, you can even start with just certain areas of the shop. Maybe it is the brass bins, or maybe it is the filters, and kind of like get one area sterilized. I think the problem that's tough on folks is if you haven't ever done it, and you go to start counting, and then you start finding all the skeletons start falling out of the closet, right? You've got shelves that you didn't know product was there. You got stuff that's outdated. It's been on the shelf too long. We've heard of people having parts for years on their shelves and the rubber rots, and because they didn't know they had it. So at any rate,
lots of benefits.
Yes,
you might find a part you're never going to probably use in a repair. Put it on eBay, get it out of there, get something for it.
Now more than ever, right?
Yeah, exactly. There might be some shop out there with a truck down that needs that part.
High school kids, college kids, you don't need your technician to do the counts or your parts department. A lot of folks are just bringing in family to do the counts. Show them how important it is. Do a couple audit checks to make sure that the process is clean, and then good to go.
This is interesting. So parts markup and margin by region. And this is, I don't think you can find this data really anywhere else. And by the way, we show margin and markup because depending on the shop, you might think of things in terms of margin or markup, but they're basically the same number, just mathematically kind of inverted. So average profit margin and the average markup on the part. And this takes into account the fact that typically a well-run shop is going to be marking up a lesser cost part more, and then as the cost of the part goes up, the percentage of markup or margin goes down. But about in the 30s, high 30s, except for Canada, is surprisingly low on the markup side. Not sure why that is. Interesting information though. So if your average markup is less than this in your region, you may want to take a hard look at adjusting your markup up, which is, we see that all the time with new Fullbay customers, right? People just doing, first of all, they're not doing a graduated markup scale.
Yeah.
And they're just doing, 20% across the board or whatever.
Yeah. No, I normally what we find is someone has flat 20%, or they're on a traditional older school pricing that's, I just add 10% on this, 20% on this, the end. And they're not really thinking about, 200% on bolts, nuts, washers, et cetera. They're not thinking about, maybe selling a filter at 150% markup if they've got a rebate program or whatever it is that they've got. But yeah, it's pretty encouraging though that these are not flat numbers, right? They're at least moving upward, which shows people are using price matrices and graduated scales, which, at the end of the day, you still are averaging where you want to be or slightly there above. Another tip too we learned from Irvin is look at part movement and adjust part scales. A lot of times you'll see ranges on scales where $1 to $10, $10 to $50, $50 to $125, $125 to $200. Reevaluate those and maybe break those down into $5 increments, where there's many slices to those parts on a $5 increment. I think Irvin's down into the dollar increments. He's even going into the pennies. But what ends up happening is that $1 here, $2 there, it's not a big deal at the customer level when they're seeing that, because you're not just moving something to a completely different category where it's jumping up, like an additional $20 or something. But that $1 or $2 at the end of the day adds more margin to your business, and you can drive these numbers up incrementally as long as you add more layers in your matrix. So more layers is better than less layers. I know it's easier to look at when you have less layers, but it doesn't necessarily generate the most revenue or profit for the shop.
Yeah, it's interesting. A good parts guy is a hard skill set to hire for and to find, and there's fewer and fewer of them. But we noticed over the years when we would encounter a shop that had a really good parts person, it was almost like that guy couldn't go on vacation because nobody else could really replicate the secret sauce of what that person could do. And typically they were suspicious that about automating the markup process using Fullbay because this guy's got it dialed in. But almost without exception, that's essentially what the parts guy was doing. They were doing a graduated markup scale, but it was in their head. Yeah. It was just a matter of getting it out of their head into basically a table inside Fullbay. And you may be charging a different markup scale based on who the vendor was, who the customer is. Maybe you have preferred customers, like the ones who allow you to, sorry, let me turn my watch off, it's dinging, who allow you to track their PMs proactively. Yeah, sorry. And so forth. And that's a good practice. And we're going to talk about that in a minute. So all of those things were going on in these parts managers, these really effective parts managers' heads. Today, in this day and age, you can automate that and dial it in. So you still need a good parts person because there's so many other things a great parts guy does. It frees them up to go find better deals on parts and so forth. And they don't have to be intimately involved in every single transaction. So take that knowledge, and there's this phenomenon, we talk about this, where something is an art and a good parts guy doing great markup feels like an art. Something is an art until you discover the underlying principles behind it, and then it becomes a science. And we've been able to dial that in really well with Fullbay with how we do the parts markup. Irvin's been a good person giving us feedback along the way because he loves it so much. But yeah, that's a real thing. So that's something to consider doing. Either start doing it if you're not, or if you have a great parts guy, get that process automated to free them up to source parts, find you better deals and so forth.
Yeah.
So
even automating it to evaluate traffic. If you have shrink that's happening in the shop, more than likely it's not nefarious activity where people are stealing from you. I think everybody's go-to is someone stealing from me. And if you can free up these parts folks from all these manual calculations and these recipes, get them focused on whether it's, bulk purchases, or at least just giving the parts, like they pick the parts or somebody's picking the parts and giving them to the techs. We find for the most of the time, if a tech can walk into the parts room and grab parts, they may or may not have put it on the service order, or they may or may not have grabbed the right part. There's two parts beside that or near each other. Maybe one's a generic, one's a premium. Get them completely away from each other. Maybe a parts person smart enough to know the difference, but a technician can go in and they'll grab a premium part when maybe they were supposed to grab a rebuild or something, because they're just close to each other in the bin. And then your inventory is walking out the door right in front of you and you don't realize it because it's not locked up.
Yeah, what's the saying? Like, don't ascribe to malice what could more easily be ascribed to carelessness or incompetence or whatever.
Process and
put the right
more
process in place.
Yep. And you have the people there, just automate as much as you can with like this price matrices, et cetera, to free them up to work on these other pieces.
Yep, totally. So that's the part shortage.
Does it get any worse? The technicians.
How about the technician? Can you guys find technicians? Have you got that dialed in? Let me launch this polling question. Was it easier or harder to hire technicians in 2021? So if you could, let us know. Was it much easier, about the same, or much harder hiring in 2021?
Oh, that's probably followed up by, did you raise your entry-level rates,
compensation
rates, or did you stick with the old 2019 pay rates?
We've been digging into that data, and there appears to be a strong correlation there.
Yeah.
And we'll see that here in a second. So I predict it's something like 1%. It was much easier. It looks like it's about 4% so far. We've got about 50% participants responding now. So I'm going to end this and share it. So this is what we're all seeing. So 4% of us on this call right now found it much easier, and we should probably just turn the time over to them.
They're probably using Jay or Aaron or something.
Or exactly. They did something because there are pragmatic solutions to this. 36% about the same, and 60% it was much harder. So 6 out of 10.
I mean, like, there are some great folks out there like Jay at Find a Wrench and Aaron at American Diesel Training Centers. And I mean, they do good work, and you got to be proactive. But in some cases, it's just the people aren't available in your market or region, and or you haven't put together an apprentice plan to help grow them and foster those relationships.
Yep, totally. So by the way, this gauge is kind of cool because the needle looks like the Y in our logo. So anyway.
Oh.
Which Ryan, who designed it originally, I think was thinking that was a road, but I think it works as a needle. Anyway, 64% of shops in our survey said it was more difficult, and there's the 1%. 1% said it was easier, and it's definitely a challenging situation out there. The ones that said it was easier, you're right, are probably using some of the innovative tools and so forth that Aaron and Jay are putting out there. Some quick stats here. Of our respondents, a third of them were between 18 and 34. So just understand that can influence the data here. So the quality of our conclusions based on the data is limited based on how much our respondents' demographics match the demographics of the market at large. And we think that the sample size was big enough that it's probably a good proxy for the market. But one limitation is you can never know for sure. So just keep that in mind. 83% of the respondents were male, 17% were female. 24% of shops say their technicians are inactive between 6 to 10 hours a week. So of the respondents, assuming that they are an accurate reflection of the market, about a quarter are saying techs are there being paid, probably hourly, 6 to 10 hours a week. Why is that a
75%.
problem, Chris?
That's a problem. Well, 75% is standard, right? If you pay me for 40 hours, we should at least bill 40 hours. But
Which would be
ideally,
100% efficiency.
correct.
So, and it's still possible to bill 40 hours even though the tech is inactive for 10 hours a week, right? Because they may be an efficient tech.
Yes.
So they're overcoming, we call that utilization.
Correct. Yep.
Yeah. So let's say the tech is paid for 40 hours a week, but 10 of those hours, they are not being productive. And some of that is unavoidable, like meetings, breaks, and so forth. So a reasonable utilization level is probably, 85 to 90% is on the high end.
Yeah, we've had a few people push the envelope into the 90s and like 90, 95. And the techs are focused, like hyper focused. There's strong incentive plans and they're just hungry for food. Like they're upset with the service person for not having another job lined up behind them.
Right.
But it takes an aggressive incentive plan to have the person kind of hot footing it around in the shop. They also get a little frustrated with their parts. Like, don't even pull it in the bay. I already know it needs these parts.
Yeah.
Like they're really on top of it. But again, that's indicative of their pay structure.
What's amazing about this is if you go to fullbay.com, you can download. We have a tool that you can. It's pretty simple. It's a one-tab spreadsheet, and we also have an online tool where you can do this. You can go in and basically put in all your shop stats and see what the difference would make if you could get your techs more utilized by like 1 hour per week. That's not hiring more techs or anything. And it's amazing the impact that has on profit, because it does go straight to profit, like what the techs are able to do during that time. It's interesting. So 17% are inactive for over 11 hours a week.
Yeah,
and it's real. I mean, waiting for parts is a problem. But there's some that there's really no excuse for, like waiting to be assigned a job or waiting for authorization. If the authorization is going through like archaic processes, like maybe paper or only email. So if you're not doing text message authorizations or giving the ability for the customer to authorize something through a portal on their own device, you're most likely leaving some money on the table in terms of tech productivity.
Absolutely. And now more than ever, if you're short techs and it's hard to find them, the one thing that you would be on my quarterly goals would get the techs to 100% efficiency.
Yeah, for sure.
I would have like a shop objective, and some of you might be on the call and say, oh, well, that's my service department's responsibility. One of the things that we found even at Fullbay, if the entire organization is aligned with the objective and the goal and they're working together, each person has an oar and we're all rowing in the same direction, goals can be achieved. And so just leaving it to your service people, the parts person might have a bright idea, the owner, maybe somebody in the office, whoever they are, even a technician could have some sort of alignment or an idea on how to solve the issue. But I definitely would have getting them to 100% as a quarterly objective with some sort of heavy incentives for the business and for the folks involved.
So you're basically talking about, we talked at the beginning about doing a financial plan for a shop. And what we mean by that is basically you take a spreadsheet, and on that spreadsheet, you have a column for every month of the year. And you put in, and once again, download this at fullbay.com. You can see this. We're not going to show it right now for time, but you put in the assumptions of your shop and it'll basically show you exactly pretty much what your financials are. It's uncanny because there's actually very few inputs that go into what produces a shop's profit. So what you can do for a plan is say, look, we know we're going to start the year at baseline at whatever we are. And then in those columns in that spreadsheet, go month by month and pick 1 or 2 metrics that you want to change, right, by the end of the year, and start putting those changes in. Like maybe you want the techs to be 5 hours more productive per week, by May or something. So you put that in there, you're going to see what the change to your profit is. And then it's on you and the team to execute that 5 hours, right? And that's how you do it. That's how you drive change and drive profitability in business. And you have to be careful not to try to change every one of those metrics, because you're probably not going to change any of them. You pick 1 or 2 of them, get the whole company, the whole shop rowing in the same direction on moving that metric through. Look at your metrics every week as a team, toolbox meeting or leadership meeting, depending on your size, and make sure we recommend every 90 days, you go back and evaluate your plan, set a goal for that next 90-day period and a 3-month or a quarter period, and just don't try to boil the ocean, just do it methodically like that. And you can move these metrics apply best practices to move them. And anyway, the report should be a good guide for what the benchmarks are. So if you're not hitting these benchmarks, that's probably a good indication of where you should set your goals initially. But anyway.
Yeah. And just one other side goal or side benefit, it helps with efficiency and tech productivity is maybe another goal for a different quarter. Once you land this one would be invoicing. At the end of a job, invoice the customer. So we often
quickly
see,
as possible. Don't let it.
End of the job, invoice the customer. It seems crazy, or it seems like, well, why wouldn't you do that? If I were standing in front of you, you would obviously invoice me. But the minute I'm not standing in front of you and I'm a charge account, for some reason we lose our way on this concept.
Right.
But if I was standing in front of you, you'd be more than willing, because I'm what they call a toe tapper. I'm just tapping my toe going, invoice me, invoice me. If you put that mindset in everybody in the shop to where a job's complete, invoice, and start the clock on the 30-day terms, 10-day terms, 90-day terms, you need to get your cash. And the only way to do that is start the clock on charge accounts immediately when the job is done.
Yeah, really, the job isn't done until payment is received. So
exactly,
that's when the fair exchange of value is complete.
Yeah.
So
a couple of goals there.
Yeah. Okay, check this out. So technician hourly rate by region. And you can see this, but this is interesting. So it's the labor rate we were showing on the earlier slide, and then the best data that we can tell for the technician hourly rate. And we're working on a better way to measure this. So it might be slightly limited, but for the most part, we think it's a pretty good indicator. And it's also limited by the fact that we are currently in at least 8.5% inflation, and there's massive upward pressure on wages and so forth. So take that for what it is. But based on the best data that we can find, this is the regional breakdown of the technician labor rate here on the right. And then on the left is what you're charging to your customers. And then what we did was we took the percentage. So basically, what's the percentage of technician labor? So what you're paying the technicians as a percentage of what you're charging your customers. So it's around 25 to 30% by region. Canada is a little low, which is interesting. Labor rate tends to be higher. Tech pay is lower, but what we saw from the survey respondents was that 73% of shops did provide a wage increase to technicians in 2021, and that the hourly wage increase was $13.88. So of the shops that did provide an increase, that was the average increase, which is interesting. Mm-hmm. We are very interested in seeing what next year's looks like, so we can trend this similar to that first tab where we were trending the revenue numbers. But what do you think about this, Chris?
Yeah, I mean, I remember when we started a shop, and this is, our private fleet, we stood up our own shop. I don't know, it was back in the early 2000s. I want to say we were paying somewhere around 24. So as I fast forward, we're almost 20 years, when I fast forward and see that, the number 24, 25 still out there, and then we're struggling to hire techs, it probably is reasonable that it's 25 to 30 is the going rate. And I know this is an average. So some of these regions are probably paying in that zip code. And whether it's, you've got to put it together via incentive, or make sure that you're getting your margin. It's back to, well, what is your bill rate? And I love that you always have this recipe where if I give a tech $1 more, how much should I charge on my labor rate?
Well, so we've been trying to develop this rule of thumb, like what's reasonable. And even though tech labor as a percentage of what you bill is about 25 to 30%, there's some fixed costs that go into that and so forth. The rule of thumb we think is about 2 to 1. So for every $1 an hour that you pay the techs more, you need to adjust what you charge your customers by about $2 an hour to keep your margins in line with where they need to be for you to be a sustainable, profitable business. So for every $1 an hour you give to the techs, you need to charge another $2 an hour to the customers at least.
Yep. So then, and when we look at this across the industry, this is where, if you were a little bit lower in your specific market, reevaluate your labor rate. We're not saying just pay techs more and not get paid, but especially techs that you're trying to keep and that you want to keep, I think you're going to have to pay them a little bit more. And then when you look at their experience, there's a fair amount of folks that, they're probably worth the $30 that we're seeing out there, and then some. And I'm sure some of you are saying we pay $35 an hour per tech.
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of people are and I see it in the comments too, the best techs are making way more money than this.
Right.
And especially when you take into account efficiency bonuses and maybe flat rate situations and so forth. So like I said, we have some limitations on this data. We look forward to getting more data in the future, and we'll see how this trends, because it's definitely trending upward. And the shops, the 4 or 5% that indicated that it's easier to hire today than it was a year ago, you got to think that one of the causes of that is you pay the techs more. Oh. And that we also saw, I can't remember if we have that slide here. We'll see, but basically there was an interesting trend where the older shop owners were less willing to pay the techs more. So depending on the demographics of the respondent, if they were an older, maybe in their 50s and 60s, they were less likely to pay the techs. And part of that is probably an attitude of, well, when I started, we were making, $5 an hour, and I'm going to pay this guy 40 or what? But the reality is that it's basic supply and demand. We live in a capitalistic society. If you want to attract labor, you have to pay more. So as the demand for labor goes up, it's going to drive the price up. So if you're wondering why you can't hire, take a hard look at what you're paying the technicians and offering them. And it might really grate on you, because it's so much more than you made. Keep in mind, housing prices are insane. People can't buy anything, and you can pass this on. You have to pass this on to your customers, and they expect it, especially during a time like this. And we talk to the fleets a lot, and through conversations with them, they understand, and they need you to stay in business. So don't feel like you have to absorb that labor rate increase what you charge your customers. So.
Yeah. I remember we were in Texas and we stopped at a massive gas station, and I don't know if anyone's a fan, but they've got, I was going to say they got a little beaver on it. Yeah. But I want to say it said, we're hiring now. And it was like $18 an hour and all of these benefits paid. There was just like this list of benefits, and it was just on every single gas pump. And there was tons of gas pumps. And I was like, that's what we're competing with. Right? Do you want to go into this, gas station? It's a large gas station. Do you want to go do that as a kid, or do you want to go get dirty in the shop? Well, pay me and I'll go get dirty in the shop, I think is kind of the theme here.
Well, and a lot of people want to get dirty in the shop. It's, there's a desire to actually get your hands on something and fix it and make things work and so forth.
Yeah,
right?
Very satisfying.
But don't punish people with lower labor rates. So I guess the main point here is the industry can support paying technicians much, much more. And if we want to attract more people in, we have to pay more. And it's going to cause people to enter the market that otherwise wouldn't have. Not that money's everything, it's not. But you have to pay enough for people to meet their basic needs.
I will say a plug for my 9-year-old daughter. She was watching me clean up this old C6 transmission, and there was just a ton, like 50 years of grease on this thing. And so I literally was with a scraper. I got to the point where there was no more blasting it. I had to start scraping it. And she saw on the transfer case, because it's hooked up to a transfer case, she saw this bolt appear, and she's like, oh my gosh, this is so satisfying. And I was like, is it really? Because I'm thinking maybe it's not. And she's like, can you clean more of that off? Is there something under there? And so I'm just scraping this. She goes, oh my gosh, there's like a whole ridge there. This is very satisfying.
And you wonder why people like watching TikTok videos of stuff like this. It's amazing.
The whole time I was like, can you want to grab a tool and help me? She's like, no. But we got to figure out a way to get her interested.
Well, as we wrap up here, so it's encouraging to see how many more shops do know their technician efficiency, and we think we're making an impact. So we've been fortunate enough to have quite a bit of market influence so far. 59% of shops know, 59% of techs know their efficiency, right? And 42% know each other's efficiency. So you may or may not want to disclose that as a shop, but shops that don't know their technicians' efficiencies don't have the data to set a goal to increase that efficiency. Right. So if you don't know it, it's not super hard to calculate. And with the right tool in place on the shop management side, you can calculate that and then set goals to drive that. And really, we just scratched the surface. I see all the comments and I love the discussion going back and forth among the participants. If you like what you see, read the full report to get up to speed on the commercial vehicle repair industry. So you can download it at heavydutyreport.com. And like I said, if you're not already a member of TMC, we want to encourage membership. So we provide you a discount code there to be a member. And obviously we've talked about Fullbay. This is a shop management software platform built specifically for commercial repair, and it does help you run a more efficient, more profitable shop and get you home to your family and out of the sea of paper. So if you don't have a system already, take a look at what we have. We'd love to show you what we built, and we're constantly improving it, and love the feedback that we get from our existing customers, for whom we are very grateful. And if you're interested in seeing a demo of Fullbay, I'm just going to launch a polling question. Just say yes, not right now, or if you're already a Fullbay customer, let us know there. And while that's going in, I wanted to point out that ever since COVID hit, we formed Fullbay Cares, where we support the charities that are connected with the industry. And this month, we are making a contribution with every sign up to Prevent Child Abuse America, which is a great cause. And we will, I'm going to end that poll here. We'll be looking forward to supporting them. So if you haven't signed up for Fullbay, now's a good time to do it. You're supporting a great cause. And that is it. We thank you for your participation. Thank you for all the interaction, the back and forth, and look forward to seeing you soon. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.